The Bible has gone through many changes across hundreds of years. The Bible we have to date was not set in stone and did not remain untouched after the biblical canon was more or less accepted. It kept going through a series of changes, some seemingly insignificant and some very significant that have a great impact in how we read our Bibles today and how we do theology today. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the most important changes that happened to the Bible right after the 4th century. We'll start with the smallest, quote unquote, smallest changes and make our way to the most drastic ones. Now, a lot of what I'm about to say comes from the wonderful book by Nick Page called The Badly Behaved Bible, which I recommend every Christian to read. So let's start with the small ones. What about the vowels and punctuation? Did you know that the Hebrew text did not originally contain vowels? That they were added later? And the fact that the Hebrew text doesn't contain vowels makes translating some parts of the Hebrew text a little trickier. Okay, so the original Hebrew text we have don't contain vowels. The Greek does, but did you know that the original Greek texts don't have punctuation or separation between words? So all the words run together like this. So when you see speech marks or punctuations in the New Testament, they have all been added by translators. They were not in the original texts. But it makes sense, right? Okay, so far, punctuation, vowels, and separation between words have been added. But here's some more. Did you know that the original texts were not divided into verses or chapters? So the first thing to be added were chapters around the 5th or 6th century. But it was around the 13th century when a more systematized way of dividing the Bible in chapters came to be. Now, verses were not added until the 15th century, almost 1400 years after the originals were made. So Jesus didn't speak in verses. Paul didn't add little numbers after each paragraph he wrote. So every time you imagine your ancient brothers and sisters reading, first stop, because most of them couldn't read. And the ones that actually could were reading a very different text. Our ancient brothers and sisters had a very different relationship with Christianity, with their God, with Jesus, where this wasn't really the queen or the king, in the sense that nobody could just open the Bible and read it. And I think you and I can celebrate the addition of verses and chapters. What a great idea. What a great invention. Because these are very useful tools. But I have to agree with Nick when he says some of the additions were less useful, less of a W. And I'm talking about titles, all of which were also later additions. Titles like the Sermon of the Mount, the Lord's Prayer. The issue with these tools or titles is that some of them give a very wrong impression of what's happening in the passage or what the purpose of the passage really is. But I have to agree with Nick here when he says that the most pervasive tool or title added was the Great Commission, which is often found in our Bibles as a summary heading for this passage. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son. This Great Commission concept or idea wasn't invented until the 17th century. The guy that really helped popularized this idea was Hudson Taylor in the 1800s, and it has become the key passage for all missionary societies. This is the Great Commission. It feels like this is more important. This piece is more important than this other piece. But is this really the Great Commission? Jesus said that the most important thing was to love God and love others. So why isn't that the Great Commission? The issue is that sometimes when putting titles, we create a sort of problematic hierarchy. This is a great piece as opposed to, but the titles weren't there. They were added by translators, theologians, scholars, etc. Okay, now we've discussed things that were added in the last 2,000 years. Now let's talk about things that were removed from the Bible in the last 2,000 years. Yes, some things were added and some things were removed. And this includes the greatest change to ever happen to the Bible. The Protestant Bible, that is. And this happened 500 years when the Reformers decided to remove more than 10 books from the Bible. Books that we now call Apocrypha or Deuterocanonicals. The Deuterocanonical books. The Deuterocanonical books. If you open a Catholic Bible or an Orthodox Bible, and I know by me saying that, you'll be like, hell no. I would never do that. I was taught to never do that. I was only going to find darkness and confusion anytime I would open a Catholic or an Orthodox Bible. You might even find the devil there. That was the wrong Bible. That was the wrong Bible. Oh my goodness, opening. Now I wouldn't even dare to open a Catholic Bible or Orthodox Bible by then. Kidding me? I would have been whipped by my church leaders. Whipped. Now, why do they have more books than us Protestants? Well, this goes back to the translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. And this was done in the famous city of Alexandria, now Egypt. Alexandria was the home of one of the biggest populations of Jews Jews outside of Palestine. However, most of these immigrants spoke Greek, not Hebrew. So according to tradition, 70 translators translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, and this version became known as the Septuagint. From the Latin phrase interpretatio Septuagintaviorum. The Septuagint includes 13 books that are not in the Hebrew canon. So why are they not in Protestant Bibles? Well, when the Reformers went back to making new translations from the original text, they went back to the Hebrew version of the text that does not contain those extra 13 books. And thus today we don't all read the same Bible. Okay, that happened 500 years ago, but what about today? Well, this sort of things keep happening. Things keep being removed from the Bible at a much smaller scale, but still there are things being removed from the Bible today. Modern translations are still eliminating pieces and words from the Bible. Let me give you 3 examples, and the most famous of these examples comes at the end. Let's start with Matthew 17:21. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him. And the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out?" So Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief, for surely I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." If you go to most modern translations, you'll see that verse 21 is no longer there. So those versions go verse 19, verse 20, and skip to verse 22. What? Why? Well, it has either been eliminated from those verses or the translators wrote that a verse in italics with an asterisk. With an asterisk. Asterisks. Asterisks? Asterisks. Asterisks? That's the cartoon, right? Asterisks. Asterisks? That asterisk or asterisks would say something like, some manuscripts include here words similar to Mark 9:29. Why was this removed? Well, what happened was that verse 21 was added later to harmonize with what Mark says. And most biblical scholars have known this fact for more than 100 years. This is no surprise. If you want a more detailed conversation about this topic, just click on the link right over there. Now, something similar happens in Mark 11. Whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive them, that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. But if you don't forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. In many Bibles, this verse 26, no longer exists. And most translators that have removed this would add a note saying something like, early manuscripts do not contain this passage. Even though this passage is apparently in the majority of the manuscripts, we don't find it in our earliest manuscripts. So most translators have to make a decision here, and most favor the earliest manuscript. And now we come to the third and most famous passage of them all, the ending of the book of Mark. Did you know that there are 2 different endings to the book of Mark? Both end in chapter 16 of Mark, but one ends in verse 8 of chapter 16, and the other one ends in chapter 20. So 12 extra verses. This is how the first version ends. Verse 5. As they entered the tomb, they saw young men dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Verse 7. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Dun, dun, dun! Tension. What's going to happen? Nobody knows. Did they go? Did they say something? Did they tell the disciples? Bah, bah, bah. This is how the second version ends. After the Lord Jesus had spoken to them, he was taken up into heaven, and he sat at the right hand of God. Then the disciples went out and preached everywhere, and the Lord worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs that accompanied it. Resolution. One has the tension, the other one resolves it completely. Dun, 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 versus happy ending. Now, there is no consensus as to why we have 2 different endings of Mark. So again, most translators choose to go with the earlier manuscripts we have. So why does all this matter? Why does it matter? Why does anything I'm saying right now matter? Now, I hesitate to end this video and bubble wrap it and explain why this is all important, because very likely, as I was talking, you already had in your mind many reasons in your head as to why this is important or why this is not important. And those thoughts you had are better conclusions to whatever I'm about to say. And I think it's more important for you to take your personal thoughts with you. But I'm going to give you my own personal thoughts as to why this matters anyway. I think the first thing we have to remember is that the Bible is a book written by humans, compiled by humans, edited by humans, and translated by humans. But it is God who brings it to life through his breath. That is what inspired means, God breathing new life into these texts. My second thought, the church is everywhere from the beginning. This gospel project was about humans. Human hands are involved since the inception of the whole thing. So writing texts and collecting writings and sending letters and bringing letters, deciding which writings are more important, which ones we're going to keep. The Bible is not a pristine document that was handed to us 2,000 years ago. And that is wonderful. And finally, we have to remember that the Bible is not the church and that the Bible is not God. The Bible is one of the witnesses we have of the love and grace and will of God. We have other witnesses as well, like our precious Holy Spirit, nature all around us, the universal church. If you hold the Bible to be the end-all, be-all of your relationship to God and your relationship with Christianity itself, you will be in serious trouble sooner than later. I believe that the Bible is first and above all other sources of revelation, but it is not the only one. Now, these are my thoughts. Please feel free to write your thoughts here in the comments. I would love to read them. If you've made it this far, I am sure you're gonna like this video. These are the 5 most important things that I've learned from my master's in theology. You might be surprised as to what they are. See you there.